Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fighting on Film. This week you join us as we trudge through the jungles of Vietnam and reoccupy an old French colonial fort with Burt Lancaster. It is, of course, Go Tell the Spartans from 1978.
One of the first Vietnam War films to come out of Hollywood, or come out of America after the war. Green Berets comes out in 1968, and that was like the first proper fictionalized Vietnam War film, wasn't it?
Yeah, there's a couple of small ones. There's one about a Marine pilot that goes down, like I think it's called The Yank in Vietnam.
Right.
And that came out in like 65, which is super early actually when you think about it. This one I think is the first retrospective, but then I think that Green Berets is kind of similar in some respects. It's base defense. It's a big classic icon of Hollywood in Burt Lancaster and John Wayne in Vietnam in roles that they're probably too old to be playing.
Yeah.
But Green Berets is that first big Vietnam movie. It's unique in that it comes out during the war itself.
Exactly. It comes out, well, around the time, well, not around the time of the Tet Offensive, but the same year. So it's an interesting film in that regard. But no, this week is Go Tell the Spartans. And it's the first of that late 70s glut of Vietnam War movies that we get with The Deer Hunter, Boys of Company C. We get, obviously the big one is Apocalypse Now. And then you get the late 80s sort of revival with War on the 4th of July, Hamburger Hill, Full Metal Jacket. These films that sort of transcend the war movie genre, exactly, Platoon. But it's really interesting to see Go Tell the Spartans tell a different story of the Vietnam War than we're sort of used to seeing. I think when we think of Vietnam War movies, we think of Apocalypse Now, don't we? We think of Platoon.
We think of that mid-war aesthetic, and it's a slugfest. It's trudging through rice paddies, jungles. It's stalemate, really terrible counterinsurgency warfare.
Yeah.
But this is, as you say, it's an earlier incarnation of that war, and it's just on the cusp of American involvement. It's set in 64, so we're about 3-4 years in, maybe a bit more actually, considering that late 50s was when the first MAAGs arrived.
Well, it was 1950 that Harry S. Truman sent the first MAAG into Indochina to aid the French in 1950. So America had been involved in that part of the world for a couple of decades. Really, when you think about it, but. So this, as Matt was saying, this one tells the story of the MAAG advisors, that Military Assistance Advisory Group, Vietnam. So, as we'll talk about in the alley tally, they weren't just in Vietnam; they were all over the world, actually, where America had a sphere of influence. And we join our cast, and what a great way to segue into cast. We join our cast as they are setting up their fire bases in a province or a
Penang, I think it is.
They're based in Penang. And then they set up in a place called Muc Wa, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. So I'll start us off with cast this week, and then Matt is doing production. So our lead role is Burt Lancaster playing Major Asa Barker. He is a Korean War veteran. Feel like he's sort of seeing out his career in Vietnam. He's got this sort of, couldn't care less attitude sort of thing going all the way through it.
Yeah, he does. He carries it really well, actually, that attitude that he has. It's devil may care almost.
That's it, yeah.
They can't touch me. I've already been passed over.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it doesn't feel like Lancaster would inhibit this role to the extent that he does, but he is one of the best things about this movie. It's such
some great lines.
Yeah, swearing like a docker. It's a really great role. We know Burt Lancaster from Zulu Dawn the next year. Run Silent, Run Deep, obviously the submarine movie. In the Train, Castle Keep. He's a big star, big star. And then we have Marc Singer as Captain Olivetti. It was his first movie credit, and he went on to appear in the cult classics, the Beastmaster series. Have you seen Beastmaster, Matt?
I haven't, no. What's that about?
It's like a fantasy sci-fi, but I think it's a bit of a cult classic. I mean, I think he's
Oh, really? No,
more well known for that than
not
this.
familiar. He does it really well, actually, considering this is his first big credit.
Yeah, I watched.
He carries that eager exec quite well.
Yeah, there's a podcast called, I think they're called the Not Another Pop Culture Podcast, and they did a special with Singer about Beastmaster. But he was saying how on set that he was really excited to act with Lancaster, and Lancaster was saying how, oh, I don't act, but now I'm getting older. I'm not as good looking as I used to. Now I've got to learn how to act with the ladies, which was quite funny. If you seek that out, it's really good.
They have some really nice scenes together, actually, don't they?
They do. They play off really nicely. You've got this eager young captain, and you've got this sort of, seen it all before, seen the world major, and they do play off each other really nicely. And then we have Jonathan Goldsmith, who plays First Sergeant Olianowski, bittered, grizzled sergeant. He's been in arm a long time. He's sort of like Burt Lancaster in the fact that he's sort of had enough.
He's a little bit further over the edge than Lancaster is, isn't he?
He's seen maybe one too many combat missions. But the actor himself is really interesting. Do you remember the meme, Matt, where was I may not be the best at this, but I am that, and it was a guy with a bottle of beer. Do you remember that meme?
Oh yeah,
that's him.
Oh no way.
That's Jonathan Goldsmith. Yeah.
Oh really?
So that meme from about 10 years ago that was doing the rounds, he was the meme, and it was actually a like a beer advert.
Is that on his Wikipedia article?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my god! Can you imagine having a career where you've been in films with Burt Lancaster, and then your Wikipedia article also includes the fun fact that you were a meme?
I think we'll probably make one of our own of them and put it up on the Twitter, which would be quite funny. But I thought that was great. But he was actually he was in Ice Station Zebra and The Shootist as well.
Oh, was he? Oh, right. Okay, they're classics. All right. Yeah, I didn't recognize him.
I recognized him from the meme, but I didn't recognize him in the movie. And then we have Craig Wasson, who plays Corporal Corsi. He's the draftee. He's your sort of sympathetic soldier. But he also appeared in the same year in The Boys of Company C, and he sings the theme tune of Boys of Company C, which I thought was quite interesting. A little connection to another war movie there. And then we have Joe Unger, I'm not too sure of the pronunciation, Unger. And he plays Lieutenant Hamilton, and he's the sort of gun-ho, poster boy, we're going to win the war sort of officer.
He's a bit of a figure of fun, isn't he? Where he sends back these, they're very boy's own. We've encountered the enemy and we have them, and that kind of thing.
Stuff like he talks in like sort of Commando-esque sound bites, doesn't he?
Yeah, he talks like he's
he's given the speech at the start to all the troops lined up, and he's like, we are going to go into the woods and we are going to set up a defense for freedom or something.
A bastion of
hope and freedom.
That's it.
Yeah.
And they all laugh at him. Lancaster has a great little line there where he says General Patton's going to give a speech.
Yeah, I love that. It's great. The dialogue is top in this film. But he was also in A Nightmare on Elm Street. And I'm not familiar with that one, so he plays a role in that. Yeah, and then we have Evan C. Kim as Cowboy, the half French, half Vietnamese translator. And he was perhaps best known for his role as Inspector Al Quan in The Deadpool.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not familiar. I haven't seen many of the Dirty Harry films, so I mean, you might.
Yeah, I know the one. Yeah. Oh my God, yeah, he is. That's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he plays.
He's Harry's partner. Yeah.
Oh well, there you go then. Yeah, that's a nice.
Rob's just getting into the 70s detective films. He's just watched Death Wish 1.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot to work through there, Rob, and then you can get to the Dirty Harry films.
So I spend all my time watching these movies for the show for everyone. That's, I'm doing you all a great service, everyone.
I'm gonna have to do a spin-off.
Next up, we have Dolph Sweet. He plays General Hartnitz. He's the sort of commanding officer in the area. Typical general, doesn't know the war on the ground. Gives Major Barker grief for what the men are wearing, things like that. It's sort of an allegory for the powers that be not knowing anything about the war in the country, which I think is quite interesting.
Classic general in war movies vibes.
Yeah, he reminds me of the general out of Kelly's Heroes.
Yes,
in that sort of same vein,
which is a compliment.
But the guy Dolph himself actually served as a navigator on B-24s in the 8th Air Force. and he was shot down over Romania. And in the prisoner of war camp, he helped put on shows for the prisoners of war. So that's what got him into acting.
Oh, cool. Lancaster was in the USO, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. But he's probably best known for his lead role in an American sitcom called Gimme a Break. I've never seen it, but apparently that's what he was
I haven't either.
best known for. And really, I mean, that was the cast of any note, because it's an independent production. I mean, Matt will go into the production in a second, but Burt Lancaster is your main standout really here. Everyone else is, I'm not saying they're playing second fiddle to Lancaster, but everyone else is sort of, they're playing a cliche, I think.
They're not on the same level with the characterization that they're given, are they? One other person of note is Corporal Oldman. The writer of the movie actually refers to him in one of the articles I read, Daniel Ford. And he's played by James Hong. He's 92 now and he's still active, and he has one of the longest careers of any Hollywood actor. He's really good in this, actually. He has a little relationship with Chaucy, doesn't he, where
that's it, yeah.
Chaucy saves him and then he saves Chaucy basically at the end, doesn't he?
He does.
But in terms of production, it's an equally interesting film in that it has quite an interesting background, because it was written by a correspondent for The Nation, which was an American magazine, a weekly, in the 60s. And it was written by a chap called Daniel Ford, who was an award-winning correspondent, actually, for his work in Vietnam. And he wrote a novel called Incident at Muc Wa, which was based on a patrol he went on with the MAAG. They passed through an airstrip or an airfield that had been set up by the French like a decade earlier and abandoned. And there was a small cemetery of 3 graves there of French soldiers which had been killed in the area. And he saw this, and when he came to write the novel a couple of years later, it was published in 1967, he took this and he meshed it with an idea of the Spartans at Thermopylae and their last stand. And that's where the much larger cemetery of French soldiers that have been defending this fort that the characters from the film reoccupy. And the film was optioned by a fairly well-known screenwriter, Wendell Mays, and he'd done The Enemy Below in 1957, The Hunters in 1958, a Korean War movie, Von Ryan's Express, In Harm's Way, and Death Wish as well, actually.
I see.
Yeah. So he wrote the screenplays for those, and he actually bought the rights to the book, adapted it, but the book wasn't a big success right out the gate. Apparently about 15,000 copies were printed, and a lot of them were pulped or incinerated.
That's a shame.
I was reading a really interesting article by Daniel Ford himself, and he has a website which he's put some articles up on, talking about the film and experiences in Vietnam and other stuff. And he recounts that the book didn't do so well, but Mays optioned it and continued to option it yearly on a renewal until he managed to shop it around to a studio.
That's good.
And during that time, they attached a number of quite well-known actors, really. They attached Robert Mitchum, William Holden, and Paul Newman, amongst others. Mays adapted the book a little bit, changed some of the characters. So originally the Chaucy character was the lead role, but that was adapted in the actual adaptation. And the Major Barker role was given a lot more meat. So the film was actually picked up in 1977, and it was given a budget of 1.5 million with Burt Lancaster attached in the role as Major Barker. The film was directed by Ted Post, who worked on a number of films, including Hang 'em High and Magnum Force. There's a Dirty Harry movie for you all.
Nice, yeah.
And a lot of TV. He worked on Combat in the early 60s. The cinematography was by Harry Stradling Jr., who was twice Oscar nominated, and probably best known within the war movie genre for doing the cinematography for Midway in 1976, so a couple of years earlier.
Oh, okay, nice.
And the score was by Dick Halligan, which the score's not intrusive, but it works quite well.
No, it's not.
I think the score really, it does some of those tropey bits where there's instrumentation-wise, it's very, this is Vietnam, or this is in the jungle,
dun, 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 dun. You know that when you get that sort of like that chime thing, they go ding, 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 ding. Like you get it in every single Nam film.
Tension right there.
That's it. Yeah.
Speaking of jungle, it wasn't filmed in the jungle. It was in fact filmed in California.
Yeah, that blew my mind actually. It does look all right, doesn't it? It's not.
Yeah, well,
bad.
it's doing a classic combat and it's doing a classic objective Burma where they're filming in California. Well, there's a reason why they picked Hollywood for being a center of film, isn't it? Because it had so many different climates and it could pull off so many different looks.
Well, bring Vietnam to us, God damn it! Get me Burt Lancaster.
So, as I say, the film was filmed in California. And Ford actually said in the article I read, I'd experienced the land almost African in its wide vistas, towering clouds, and cruel scarcity of water. The movie gave us prototypical jungle, oppressive and soggy. That's a classic Nam trope, isn't it?
Yeah.
And perhaps that's what people are expecting after watching 10 years of Vietnam news footage.
Yeah, of course, because that's the
stomping
thing.
through jungle and rice paddy.
People would know that look. They'd know it better than they would know perhaps what the bocage looks like in Normandy. They're going to know what Khe Sanh looks like. They're going to know what Hue looks like. It is interesting in that sense that these movies are sort of the first sort of movies that the general public have more of an idea of how they should look as well.
I don't actually know whereabouts Ford was when he was doing his correspondent work from Vietnam, but the geography of Vietnam changes and is so varied.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that, ironically, they made California look like a jungle when the reality of Ford, what he experienced, was closer to what the actual climate in parts of California is actually like.
Perhaps.
It's dry and a little bit dusty. And that rounds us out for production. As I said, it had a budget of about 1.5 million. I couldn't find information on what its box office was. I do know that they fell a little bit short on the production, and Lancaster stepped in with about $150,000 of his production company's money and helped boost that a little bit and make sure that the film actually was finished.
Big money, Burt, throwing his money around.
Yeah, well, he was a clever man. He diversified and he produced a lot of movies.
I know that I read that he said that he really enjoyed the script of the movie. So I think you can tell in the movie that he's loving the character. So
yeah, I think there's an enjoyment behind the portrayal he's giving, isn't there? Yeah,
exactly. And you can't exactly tell where the production money starts and where the Burt Lancaster money comes in. It's not like they've stopped shooting for months and something feels off about the production. I mean, sometimes you get that now when they do reshoots and you can sort of tell someone's wearing a wig, or it doesn't feel like the lack of money affected the movie at all, I don't think.
No, it must have been either during filming and they realized there would be a shortfall. What do you think about the film in terms of its quality? Because we spoke about this before we started recording, and I think it does have a bit of it's not peak A-grade blockbuster in its vibe and feel, is it?
I felt like it had like a B movie feel to it. If you have told me that if like someone like Orion had made it, like the people that made RoboCop, like if they'd have made it, I felt like it just has that sort of B movie type 80s feel to it.
Yeah.
Something about it. I don't know whether it's the color palette, the grading of the movie, or
it could be the film stock it was shot on.
Something about it, because there's a lot of flat mid shots of people talking, and something about the camera work. It's just a little bit flat at times, and it gave me that sort of video-y type. I don't know how to describe it.
How do you think it compares with something, say, like Fire Post Gloria?
A little bit like that, I think.
It doesn't have the scale of Five Ace Gloria, I would say, or Green Berets for that matter. Yeah,
true. But I think because it's a smaller tale of, because it feels like a Second World War movie at points. It's like a platoon on a mission, and I mean, I think I'm paraphrasing what Ebert said about it in 1982 when they reappraised the film for their review show in the States. But he said like falls down because it doesn't transcend its own story. So like, with Apocalypse Now, that movie's got that Coppola feel to it. It's big and it's bold. You've got Hamburger Hill, which is really gritty and visceral. Full Metal Jacket is about the psyche of war and how it affects people. But this one is just a little bit okay, we need to go here and do the mission. Isn't Vietnam horrible? Something missing about the movie.
It does feel confined, but I found that it worked because it's set in the jungle.
Okay.
And it gives you that sense of trepidation because the Viet Cong could be anywhere. And in the end, they do pop up out of foxholes and ambush the MAAG team as they're trying to leave.
I felt they didn't do enough of that. It felt like it was all doing everything it wanted to do in the last 20 minutes.
I know what you mean. If you compare it to, say, Green Berets again, there's a lot of that jungle improvised booby trap stuff going on. The soldier gets impaled in the chest. Someone stands on a punji stick pit. There's claymores getting set off by Vietnamese ambush patrols. But you don't get as much of that. You get a little bit where there's a Viet Cong roadblock, which isn't typical of that jungle bamboo punji stick sort of booby trap stuff that we mentally associate with Vietnam.
Yeah,
but we get a little bit of it at the end, as you say. It does put a lot of it into the last 20 minutes.
I think so. Maybe it might be interesting to read a review from the time, see what they were thinking at the time. So we've got one from the Daily Mirror, and it's from the 30th of June, 1978, and the reviewer is Arthur Thriffle. And he said, military misfits, the Vietnam War was a traumatic experience for Americans, and they're still trying to purge their conscience in numerous films. Go Tell the Spartans is set in the early days of the conflict when Americans were acting as military advisors to the corrupt South Vietnamese regime. Burt Lancaster plays Major Barker, an aging professional soldier in charge of a group of military misfits who would be hard put to prevent a bun fight in a kindergarten. This is no great anti-war film. Many of the characters are from the Hollywood factory, but its heart is in the right place. I don't think you can say fairer than that, really. I kind of do agree with this guy.
Yeah. It's very straightforward in plot and true. I think Lancaster was 64, 65 when the film was made.
Yeah.
So he's a little bit old at this point, even for a passed over major.
But Mitchum would have been too old as well.
Oh, yeah. All the other guys that were associated with the role probably would have been too old for it.
I feel like it wanted to trade off of these guys' previous war movie glory. You know what I mean? It wanted to just be like, it's a war film, so we have to get someone like Mitchum or, like a Burt Lancaster in because they're known for war
elder
movies.
statesman sort of actors that can pull in an audience still. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And another aspect of it is with the cast and the way the characters are characterized is that it's a lot of tropes from former war films and a lot of Vietnam tropes that would emerge. So you've got the grizzled NCO who's on the edge. You've got the gung-ho second lieutenant, as you mentioned earlier, Robin. Then you've got some of the new tropes being introduced where you've got a drug-addled medic who's addicted to opium. And that's something we'll see time and time again in later Vietnam films. And those ideas and depictions are grounded in historical fact. But I think it's really interesting that they decided to insert that into a film set in 1964. Where
I think, you get this feeling it's trying to show you that the war was already lost.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
100% get that.
The end of the film, which we'll discuss in a bit, absolutely points out it's 2020 hindsight, isn't it, from the film?
Massively. But we wanted to ask your opinions, dear listeners, and we put it up on our Twitter again, at Fighting on Film. Beat me to it. And we were asking again for your one-word reviews because last week they were very interesting. And this week we have David Bobber says one word, cowboy. Rubber says, or Rubber Comedy on Twitter, he says decent. And then Brian Williams sums it up by saying far too good a film for one word. So some varied ones again there, but I think people really like this movie, it would seem, on the Twitter, for what we could gather.
It definitely has its place within the genre.
It does,
of Vietnam War movies, definitely. Not only because it's portraying an interesting period, but also it's a competently made film, and it stands up, and it's an interesting look at that early war, that early period of the war that doesn't really get depicted in other films.
No, it doesn't. So just before we go into the alley tally, I think we'll just quickly give you a rundown of the plot. So this MAAG team are tasked with establishing a fire base.
They're tasked with reoccupying an old French position, aren't they? And
Yeah.
at this point, the area that Burt Lancaster's character, Major Barker, is commanding is very thinly stretched. He's working with like a local militia, and he's working with the ABRN. He has a finite team with which to parcel out and advise these elements. It's basically packs off
Like
the
5 of his
newest
own recruits. Yeah, just sends them out. You get this great little sequence where he's
the replacements that have
vetting
arrived.
them all in this like
they'll do.
Yeah, you get this sort of wild geese-esque rotation of the men showing you who they are and what their trope's
a bit of a classic trope. Yeah,
it really is. But it's and that's your plot is basically these guys in Muc Wa setting up this fire base. Burt Lancaster back at base, trying to command them the best he can. One hand tied behind his back from Harnitz because he doesn't know what he's doing, and then another hand tied behind his back because the South Vietnamese are the ones that hold all the heavy weapons. So he's got to work.
Yeah, and the manpower.
And the manpower, and then you've got the powers that be, the top brass, being like, well, we're going to tell you where the Vietnamese are going to attack because we know best. And he's sort of on the ground being like, you don't know the war that I'm fighting. So there's a lot going on. But then again, I think that's when the movie falls flat because there's almost too much going on at some points.
There is. Well, there's so much to convey, isn't there, with Vietnam? And one of the aspects of that I liked was those introductions to the new replacements which are arriving shows his weariness and shows his, okay, I know these type of guys. I know that type of soldier. Chaucer's character is a draftee, and he's volunteered to be in Vietnam, extended his term of service for another 6 months. As an old soldier, Lancaster's character just can't quite understand why he's doing that until the end of the film, when it becomes clear that he wants to be a hero. He's a tourist. Another one of Lancaster's great lines in this. You're a tourist, and I'm sorry we couldn't give you a better war.
That's it, yeah. You know? Yeah, exactly, yeah. It's a great line. Love it. But I think that the movie is sort of, I got it in my notes, it's like an allegory for biting off more than you can chew. And that's what I think it's trying to say about the American war in Vietnam, is that if the MAAG advisory teams couldn't do anything with the local troops, then what are more, US combat troops going to do?
And the general character actually says, well, we can't win this war until we've got American ground troops here.
Yeah, exactly.
And that wouldn't be for another year or so.
Yeah.
But it's foreshadowing that greater involvement that was coming. And I liked another part of that scene actually at the beginning where he's in his office, and it comes down the line that they need to reconnoiter this camp and an old village and see whether it's worth setting up a fire base there or a base there, patrol base. And he says, just make it up, make up the report, say there's 200 Vietnamese there.
Yes.
It's not suitable. There's no need. There's no enemy activity in the area, and it's not suitable for a patrol base or any other kind of activity in the area. It's not needed. And it backfires on him because it turns out that it's been abandoned for 10 years and no one's lived there. The general is adamant there's going to be another base there. And Lancaster has one of his best lines in that sequence. That's what happened to the French, tied down in static defense, because they're setting up all these little patrol bases.
So I think on that note, maybe we should go into the alley tally this week, because there's a lot of interesting things to talk about.
Oh, there is, yeah.
It's time for Alley Tally on Fighting on Film.
So this week, I wanted to kick off by talking about how this movie sort of bucks the trend of how we imagine the US combat trooper in Vietnam. When we think about Vietnam War films, to a lot of us, it'll be Apocalypse Now, it'll be Platoon, it'll be Hamburger Hill, it'll be these late war. And I think we think of American troops with third pattern jungle fatigues with the slanted pockets, paratrooper-esque type fatigues, peace and love written on their helmet liners, M16s, gunships flying all around. But this movie bucks that trend because it shows the MAAG, as we've said, the Military Assistance Advisory Group in country wearing their very plain American OG olive green 107 shirts with their white
name tapes. Yeah.
Big US Army badges on, wearing sort of a mishmash of World War II and M56 webbing. And it's a very different look to what we associate with Vietnam. I know that if you're a Vietnam aficionado, you'll know that the early combat troops in Vietnam were wearing that sort of uniform as well. But to see these MAAG troops who look like they could have fought in the Korean War, or they could have fought in the Pacific in the 1944-45, to see them in Vietnam is very different, but it shows that sort of how long the Americans have been in Vietnam. And that is translated in the weapons as well. So a lot of the men are running M1 carbines with the 30-round magazines, Second World War weaponry still. I think that's very interesting. It's just something that this movie is showing the audiences they might not be accustomed to, which I thought was quite a good thing in the movie. One of the things I really enjoyed about it.
Yeah, it's definitely a positive. It's a period of the war that isn't often depicted, and it's interesting to see it. And as you said, like the Arben have got M1 Garands, M2 carbines, Thompsons, BARs. It's all Second World War kit, and it makes complete sense. We won't see those iconic weapons of what we now associate with the Vietnam War for another few years yet. The film's set in 1964, but the M16 wouldn't be introduced as standard in the theatre for another 4 years. But MAAG did have them. They were the first people to get them.
Yeah, they did. But you also see as well, like the jungle stripe camo, like has been a holdover from like Indochina. I know that Havertz and Harnitz in the movie says, "Oh, those French style fatigues," because the French wore like duck,
like the tiger stripe,
but they also wore like duck hunter type uniforms. I wish I just had a few more different sort of weapons, like maybe a sort of a Carl Gustav SMG or a MAT 49 SMG, something just a little bit more different. Could you also see MAAG forces training up South Vietnamese soldiers with like Sten Mark 2s and Kar 98s and things like that? I just wish there'd been a little bit more variation, maybe just to show the real uniqueness of MAAG at the time. But I think it's a decent representation, personally.
They were training counterinsurgency forces, weren't they? And local defense units and that sort of thing. So the plethora of different weapons and surplus that congealed and congregated in Vietnam after the Second World War is really interesting, and we get glimpses of that. So James Hong's character is seen with a Mosin-Nagant M91.
Yes.
Full, the classic full length Mosin-Nagant. He's also seen with a Gewehr 98 as well at one point.
Yeah,
so
sort of
it
switches
changes,
out,
doesn't he?
Yeah.
And then all of those, the militia guys I think they're supposed to be Montagnard. I know they're based on Montagnard.
Yeah. Great
shotguns. They're all armed with Winchester 1897s and 1912s and side-by-sides. Just this selection of weapons that really, if you were going up against the Viet Cong, you wouldn't really want to be using a side-by-side, would you?
Well, that's what Olenowski mentions, doesn't he? He says, these guys are armed with shotguns. What are they going to do? It's another allegory. It's like, well, we're going to need more than what we're giving them to do anything, put a dent in the... I know that giving like the Arvin troops M16s was even a thing of contention when the M16 came in. I know they got a lot of hand-me-downs from the American troops.
Thing about that is that when they were appraising the M16, or as it was at the beginning of the war, the AR-15, they were thinking about, well, these lighter weapons with a less powerful cartridge or a less sharply recoiling cartridge would be much better for these smaller stature guys.
Right.
And that was one of the recommendations that went through and said we should equip the entire South Vietnamese army with M16s or AR-15s, and that was one of the driving forces to equipping soldiers that were stationed and deployed to Vietnam with M16s eventually.
Okay.
Ironically, it will be years before they began to get the M16 because it was prioritized to US troops who arguably would have handled the heavier weapons better because they were bigger statured.
It's like you still see Arvin troops in like 67, 68 running M1 Garands and M1 carbines. And you're like, how on earth are they going to fight the Viet Cong with
BARs, M19, 18, A2s?
Yeah, and the Viet Cong are running AK-47s and Dushka machine guns and all this sort of heavy, like Russian equipment, and you're like, well, you're not helping them help themselves if that's the point of the war. It's another thing the movie does, I think, hint upon.
Lancaster himself carries a M3 grease gun. It's not an M3A1 because it's still got the charging handle. You can see it when he's got it hung in his office behind him. You can just see the charging handle, I think. And it doesn't have that awful flash that they added to the conical thing that looks like a lampshade. He gets to fire it towards the end of the film, and there's a couple of the other guys that are equipped with them. The young second lieutenant has an M1928A1 Thompson.
He does. That was nice to see as well.
A couple of the South Vietnamese army guys do as well. They're all armed with M1 Garands and M2 carbines, so you can spot that Thompson whenever someone's got one.
Yeah, you can. I wonder if Lancaster having the grease gun was meant to be like a holdover from his days in Korea. The grease gun saw a lot of action in Korea, so I wondered if it was like tied into his character.
Maybe, but I reckon probably there was a lot of MAAG guys that did carry them.
Yeah, you see them. I've definitely seen them.
It would have been, as you were saying earlier, but it would have been really cool to have seen him with a very early AR-15. That would, pronged flash hider, waffle mags.
Oh, would be good. I thought it'd been funny for him to carry an M16 and then him never use it, and him have like the most iconic weapon, but him just like walking around with it.
That would have been very accurate, wouldn't it?
I would have liked that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You see a lot. You see if you watch MAAG video, like training films or newsreel footage, you see the COs with M16s and the other lads just walking around with M1 or M2 carbines. It would have been a nice touch.
It would have been. It would have been really cool. It works, I think, in terms of the weaponry. It definitely fits with the period, and again, it gives you that visual separation of the period from the later Vietnam portrayals and this era.
Boys in Company C, literally the same year, they've all got M16s.
What's your alley pick then?
Well, as I say, it was just to see the separation of kit, really.
I think mine's Cowboys crop top.
Yeah, I wondered what he was doing halfway through that. I was like, why is he wearing a crop top in the jungle? Like
a crop top and a revolver in a shoulder holster is a look.
And with a machete on your back. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
He looks very, very alley in the sense of the word.
Indeed. The other interesting bit of kit in the film is the appearance of some Sikorsky C-34 Choctaws, which not quite right, but it's again it's that visual differentiation between Hueys and Chinooks. Obviously, at the time, it would have been H-21 Shawnees, which were the Army helicopter in Vietnam.
Right.
And then I believe later the Marine Corps used the Choctaw, the C-34, CH-34. We all have different names for them. So Rob and I were talking about this before. We identified it initially as a Westland Wessex, iconic British Cold War helicopter, but the Wessex was obviously produced under license from Sikorsky.
Okay, so that's cleared that up for me. I didn't know that. So
yeah, interesting, isn't it? But again, it's that differentiation between the periods. So we get to see CH-34s instead of Hueys, and there's a Bell Sioux, which is probably more associated with the Korean War and MASH.
Yeah, it sort of comes in and fires some rockets, doesn't it? Shoots some rockets at some VC. So
they were interesting little inclusions, I thought.
You can't have a Vietnam War film without helicopters. You just can't. No,
exactly.
It's in the contract of every single Vietnam War movie ever made.
It's a necessity.
Heaven forbid they make a Hue movie with tanks. Jesus Christ, that would blow people's minds. But that's for another day. So I think we'll go on to favourite scenes.
Hello there. Sorry to interrupt. I wanted to let you know that you can now join our supporting cast over on Patreon. As thanks for your support, you'll be able to help us pick films, submit questions for guests, have first pick on brand new and exclusive merch, and much more. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show. What have you got this week for your favourite scene?
I struggled this week, I have to admit. It's the first time I've struggled with a favourite scene for a while, actually. It's not that I didn't like the movie at all, don't get me wrong, I did like it. I'm not saying it's not of any merit, because the movie is okay, but the one thing I do want to just highlight is how well I think Burt Lancaster nails his character in this movie. He's my favourite thing about it. He gets the best dialogue. He gets the best. I think he's got a really good look about him. I know his limp was self-afflicted from a golfing injury a few years before the movie was filmed, but it really adds to his look. You see him limping everywhere. You know, he's always smoking a cigar.
It's an old soldier limp. Yeah.
Old soldier. Yeah. He just really encapsulates the sort of character they want him to go for. Because I think by the end of the movie, of course, he's sympathetic to the Vietnamese. He wants to save the villagers that he sort of found and helped at the fire base earlier on. You know, there's a young girl that he sort of likes, and he wants to sort of save them. He doesn't believe that they're evil or they're communists or anything like that. And then he stays behind.
He feels almost bound by Chaucer's decision to stay, doesn't he?
That's it, yeah. And it shows him as this sort of, okay, I get what you're doing. I understand now. You know, I might not have seen your reasoning at the beginning, but he knows that you got to do right by these people, at least, you know, these people. But he's still trying to say that it's their war. You know, come on.
Chaucer wants to be a hero, doesn't he? That's what he says.
Exactly. And he's like, you know, you're trying to be a hero, a hero. He just has other great lines as well. It was the Wattsburg character, the PsyOps guy. He says that the Muc Wa fire base isn't priority anymore, to not worry about it. And as Burt Lancaster goes to get in the chopper to go and evacuate the American troops there, he says to him, Wattsburg, do you love your commanding officer? And the guy says, yes. He says, that's fine, because I love you too. And he just walks off. And you're like,
it's so bizarre. It's such a weird line.
It's so great.
Yeah, some great ones though. There's a bit where he's talking to, I think he's talking to the XO, and he says, my men are spread thinner than the hairs on a baby's ass.
yeah.
Or it might have been the general, actually.
One of the first scenes you see him sitting down there talking about the plot. He goes, oh, where's this place, like Muc Fuck or whatever it's called? And you're like, he just doesn't give a shit. And then you get this great tale that he tells at the officers' mess with Captain Olivetti, and he's saying how like some officers are gentlemen and I'm not a gentleman. You know, have you ever thought, well, I'm not a major? And he goes in this massive spiel about how he getting a blowjob like in front of the president, and it's just like not something I expected Burt Lancaster to be having a monologue about, but it's just so encapsulating and like so interesting. Burt Lancaster made this movie better than the sum of its parts for me.
It's the bit where he goes, well, I did what I was trained to do. I saluted.
Saluted. It's brilliant. I had me cracking up. It's just some great dialogue in the movie, and I think Bert's my favorite thing. What about you, Matt?
You mentioned it a little bit there. The PsyOps chap who arrives midway through to introduce the incident flow priority indicator. Mm-hmm. And he has a number of really good little scenes with Lancaster again, and it's that actor's interaction with Lancaster that makes those scenes. So Lancaster's as we've said, he's the experienced soldier. He understands the situation on the ground via his own, I guess, a mixture of what he's seen and a sort of sixth sense, in that he knows that there's areas that the VC are going to be more active in, and he knows that Muc Wa is going to be a magnet if the VC know that they're there. And it's clear that they do pretty soon, as soon as they set up communications. And this poor PsyOps officer is trying to explain flow diagrams and indices and indexes and how the computers in Saigon are working out the potential for an attack here, there, and everywhere. And it takes all information and it makes an average and it works out the flow indicator in the process. And Lancaster's just sat there going, what the fuck? He's just got this what the fuck face
so
on.
Like despondent. He's like, what? How's that going to help?
And he just sums it up by going, you're going to tell me when the enemy are going to attack? And the PsyOps officer just goes, basically, yes. Yeah. And he then holds up the incident flow priority indicator. And you're thinking, from all the spiel he's given, it's going to be something, interesting, spectacular, technological. And it's just a board with 3 little shelves in different colors, yellow, orange, red, color-coded to threat levels.
And then it's above the door and he just ignores it every time he walks past.
Yeah. So and there's a scene where they've been drinking. It's just after the blowjob explanation scene of why he's been passed over for promotion so many times, which I love, by the way. I love the bit where he's like, the Joint Chiefs have a secret hidden list deep in the Pentagon vaults that every time someone comes up for promotion, they go and check. And I'm on that list, and I'm never getting a promotion.
Yeah, it's great. It's fantastic.
But he opens his office door, and the guy is in there putting in the little name tags of the positions, the patrol bases, into this indicator. And he's on like a ladder behind the door, and he gets thrown. It's the best bit of stunt work in the whole film, actually. He gets thrown onto his desk, and he's like, "What the hell are you doing behind the door? What are you doing in my office?"
Yeah, it's like absolutely pissed out of his head. Yeah, it's great.
It's great. It's just those little scenes. They kind of poked fun at I guess the McNamara approach to Vietnam, where it's very very mechanical and methodical and data driven.
Yeah,
compared to Old Soldier, experienced on the ground, knows what's going on.
I like that about it. It was just, I just was so shocked to see one of the elder statesman-esque Hollywood actors in Burt Lancaster just being this sort of foul-mouthed soldier. I wasn't expecting it. So I think this week that wraps things up. We'll go into final thoughts. What do you think of Go Tell the Spartans?
I enjoyed it. I thought it was trying to do some things that other Vietnam films wouldn't approach for a few more years. I thought it was interesting that it was obviously made with a lot of hindsight. It's one of the earliest post-war movies. Competent cast, not the best cinematography. It's well shot. As you said, some of those conversational scenes are a little bit flat.
It's static.
Yeah. The environment and the mise en scene's good. You know, the psyops guy was drinking a Coke. The radio op toffee had some great comic relief. Again, that's another one of those tropes that we were talking about earlier. But there's lots of really nice little things to like about the film. And as we've banged on about, we like that differentiation of the periods. So it's an earlier phase of the war. And I think that makes the film all the more enjoyable because it's something we aren't as familiar with. We aren't expecting certain things to happen or the ways things are going to evolve. That's kind of let down a little bit by some of it being a little bit tropey, not only from earlier Second World War movies and Korean War movies where it's a squad and it has their delegated roles as characters, but also from some of the stuff that would creep in later. So like, as we said, Toffee's character is a little bit counterculture. We've got the drug-addled medic who is called Abraham Lincoln and delivers a speech while
that fucking
out of his mind.
So weird. Yeah,
doesn't really work.
Didn't add anything. Yeah, it didn't add anything for me either.
And he doesn't die. That the thing. If he died in that scene where he stood in an observation tower.
Yeah. I thought he was going to get sniped.
The patrol base.
And he didn't.
He was obviously so out of it. He just tucked and rolled.
Yeah.
I think that scene would have been given a little bit more weight if he'd perhaps died in there. But it doesn't really add anything, and it's a little bit bizarre because it goes on a little bit too long.
It does.
And another area where the film, to round out my criticisms, is a little bit irritating is the Chaucer character himself. And I don't know whether the character was written that way for him to be irritating for the viewer, or it was just the way that character was portrayed by the actor. I'm weighing in on the former. So the character itself is very naive, idealistic.
Yeah. They
encounter on a patrol a Viet Cong family, and he's very trusting, and he goes in full hearts and minds mode, doesn't he?
He does, yeah.
Chocolate? Do you want some chocolate? It's good chocolate.
Delicious, yeah.
You know, and he's like, this kid's cute. Like, hello.
Yeah, that scene just was just like, oh,
I'm American, I'm here.
Yeah.
Well, we know, this is it. Like, we know that Hearts and Minds isn't going to work eventually in Vietnam. And Hearts and Minds is a very difficult counterinsurgency
tactic.
Thank you. To get to work in an counterinsurgency situation. And him offering some chocolate isn't going to cut it. But he's trying. And it's kind of irritating that he's ignoring the sergeant and Cowboy's character, the Vietnamese interpreter Scout. I understand that it's written that way because not only is Cowboy seen to be extremely vicious towards the Viet Cong.
Yeah.
Beheading one of the prisoners they take and seeing torturing another in an interrogation. You're partially thinking how he just sees everyone as the VC. And then the grizzled and worn out sergeant also has a similar opinion where he just doesn't care about these people
It's like
anymore.
it's their war. Like you got to let them do it their way. Yeah. Which was a train of thought at the time. Like, should the US pull
Understandable. If you've been there, his character's had 3 MAAG teams shot from under him, he explains.
Yeah, exactly. So if anyone's going to know anything about the war, it's going to be him. But Chaucer just acts, I think he just acts above it sometimes.
I think it's interesting because you see him trying to be the hero in the hearts and minds situation. And then he goes, give me a fire team, I'll cover them coming in. And he goes and covers a patrol that's coming into the firebase. So he's trying to be a hero both
ways
in the fighting and also in the hearts and minds department.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah. It's interesting. The character doesn't quite work for me. It just becomes a little bit grating the way he discounts everyone's experience. And I think that's the whole point. It's his decision to remain that leads to Burt Lancaster's death at the end of the movie.
Yeah, and we see like old naked Burt Lancaster for 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Oh, I never got out of the head.
Not only did we get recounted the tale of him being given a blowjob, but we also get to see Burt Lancaster's bum. Who would have thought?
Very odd. Yeah.
But I think that's how it was written. And I think we're supposed to come away with the thought of, well, that was naive of him. Because he's the survivor and he's saved by James Hong's character, who drags him under a tree when he's wounded.
Yeah.
And Hong himself is killed, found dead later on.
The only bit I found really egregious, obviously having seen a lot of war movies now and having seen a lot of Nam films, I really hated that final scene. Spoilers, sorry for anyone who hasn't seen it. But there's this old...
Bit late now.
Yeah, sorry. There's this old Vietnamese scout who half raises a rifle to Corsi and he drops it. And I think he says something like, I'm going home, Charlie, if they'll let me. And he like walks off. And I was like, oh, please. Yeah. That was so ham-fisted and corny. I'd rather they've just left that of him just walking off. It would have had way more impact. And if they're trying to like make an allegory to the way Vietnam ended, surely the Vietnamese soldier nearly killing all the Americans, but then the Americans just walking off and leaving like they did in Saigon, or like they did when they de-escalated their troops in Vietnam. Yeah, that would have said way more than him saying that really corny line.
Yeah, if he just watched him leave, that would have been powerful enough.
Exactly. That's where the movie falls down for me. That's why I think it felt very B-movie, because it was a bit like, oh, wasn't it awful, Vietnam War? Like, we know that anyway, it was bad. Like, come on.
Yeah. The film's just shown us how bad it was.
It just needed to be more at the end there. It's all really sort of annoying.
I suppose the most interesting aspect of this film is it's probably the first anti-Vietnam War movie.
Yeah, I think it's considering it's one of the first that's made. It's very anti-war. As I say, better than some of its parts. It's definitely watchable. You know, I didn't have any issues with the pacing or anything like that. Something about it just felt off, just felt B-movie-esque to me.
I think it's a matter of budget. That's what I think it comes down to. I think another $1 million on top might have given a little bit more scale. For instance, we don't really see any close-ups of the Viet Cong when they're attacking.
No, we don't. We don't.
It's all night fighting, pretty much, which is fine. It works really effectively, and that's the reality of war as well. It's definitely a film to seek out if you're interested in Vietnam and that subgenre of war films.
Definitely seek it out if you haven't seen it. If you're interested in that early part of the conflict. So that was Go Tell the Spartans, and thanks yet again for listening. And you can follow us on Twitter, find us on the website, fartingonfilm.com. Coming up on the show, we are recording an episode with Robert Lyman in early February about the 1961 film The Long, the Short and the Tall with Richard Todd. So if you want to ask Robert any questions about that movie or about the troops in Burma, please do get involved in our Patreon. If you sign up, then we sometimes do this with our guests if they're up for it, where we get our patrons to ask questions that we'll read out and get answered during the show.
We've had some great questions in the past, and that's not the only perk we have up there. Each month we offer up the opportunity to vote on a film that we're going to cover. We have lots of physical perks to say thank you as well for supporting us. head over to fightingonfilm.com, click on the Patreon button, and you can check it all out yourself. And if you'd like to become a member of our supporting cast, then it would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you very much if you choose to do so. And thanks for listening. Again, we'll catch you next week.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.